Black waiter came to the rescue of a billionaire's deaf father. His sign language left everyone stunned. Someone get this man out of here before he causes any more embarrassment. Victoria Ashford's shrill voice echoed through the VIP room at Le Bernardin restaurant, causing several heads to turn toward table 7, where a gray-haired gentleman was gesturing desperately as his face grew redder and redder. Andre Santos, 28, was holding a tray of expensive crystal when he heard the commotion. He had been working there for 2 years, always invisible among Manhattan's elite, serving dishes that cost more than his weekly salary. He never imagined that this ordinary Thursday night would become the moment that changed everything. "Dad, please, you're making a scene," Victoria whispered through clenched teeth, clearly mortified as other customers began to whisper and point. The man, approximately 65 years old, continued to gesticulate frantically, his breathing visibly irregular, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Maitre d' Timothy Richardson approached the table with his usual aristocratic poise. "Mrs. Ashford, perhaps we should call an ambulance? Your father seems to be having some kind of episode." Episode. Victoria laughed nervously, her diamonds sparkling in the light of the chandelier. "He's just being dramatic. He's always like this when he doesn't get his way." But Andre saw something different. His trained eyes picked up details that others overlooked. The man wasn't throwing a tantrum. His hands were moving in specific, desperate patterns. Sign language. And from the way his lips were twitching and his eyes were wide, he was clearly panicking, trying to communicate something urgent. "Excuse me," Andre interrupted gently, setting the tray on the table beside him. Timothy glared at him. "Santos, go back to the kitchen. This is none of your business." "He's having a panic attack," Andre said calmly, ignoring the maitre d'. "And he's trying to say he needs his heart medication." Victoria looked at Andre as if he had just spoken in an alien language. "How could you know that?" Without asking permission, Andre approached Mr. Ashford and began gesturing fluently. "Sir, it's okay. Where is your medicine?" The relief on the man's face was instantaneous. His hands trembled as he pointed to his jacket, signaling that the medicine was in his inside pocket. Andre quickly retrieved the bottle of nitroglycerin and helped the man take the sublingual pill. The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria was speechless, Timothy seemed to have swallowed his pride, and the other customers watched the scene with a mixture of shock and curiosity. "Thank you," Mr. Ashford signaled to Andre, his hands still trembling but with more controlled movements. "My daughter. She never learned. She was always embarrassed." Andre nodded understandingly and signaled back, "Don't worry. The important thing is that you're safe now." You really understand my father?" Victoria whispered, her voice laden with an emotion she clearly hadn't expected to feel. Andre looked at her with the kind of serenity that only exists in those who have weathered much worse storms and lived to tell the tale. For years, he had served those people in silence, being treated like furniture, listening to condescending comments about how lucky he was to work in such a fine place. But there, in front of all the looks of contempt that turned into curiosity, he stood firm, like someone guarding a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. If this story of prejudice and overcoming adversity touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple moment of compassion would become the catalyst for a revolution that no one would ever forget. Victoria looked at Andre with a mixture of confusion and something that seemed almost shame. "You really do talk to my father better than I do," she murmured, her voice losing its aristocratic haughtiness for the first time that evening. "How many years has he been deaf?" Andre asked gently, as he helped Mr. Ashford settle more comfortably in his chair. "Since he was 40. A car accident." Victoria looked away. "I tried to learn sign language a few times, but I always had other priorities." Timothy Richardson cleared his throat loudly, clearly uncomfortable with the scene. "Santos, I believe we've done more than enough here. The other customers are waiting." But Andre didn't move. Instead, he continued signing with Mr. Ashford, who was now smiling and gesturing animatedly about something related to books and literature. The conversation flowed with such naturalness that Victoria realized, with a tightness in her chest, how much time she had wasted without really knowing her own father. "Where did you learn that?" Victoria insisted, ignoring the maitre d's disapproving look. Andre hesitated for a moment. "My younger sister was born deaf. I learned when I was a child." "Your sister," Victoria repeated, as if processing the idea that this man she saw serving wine every week had a family, a history, a complex life beyond these walls. Santos. Timothy raised his voice, this time with real authority. Table 12 has been calling for 5 minutes. Get back to work immediately. Andre nodded respectfully, but before walking away, he signaled something quickly to Mr. Ashford, who laughed genuinely for the first time all evening. Victoria watched the exchange with an expression that oscillated between curiosity and something dangerously close to remorse. What did he say? She asked her father. Mr. Ashford signaled back, but Victoria just stared blankly, reminding herself once again of her own limitation. Andre, who was a few feet away, translated without being asked. He said he finally found someone who speaks his language. The next few hours passed in a strange dance of avoidance and observation. Victoria found herself following Andre with her eyes as he served other tables, noticing for the first time the way he moved, not like someone subservient, but with a quiet dignity she had never noticed before. Every gesture was precise, every interaction with other customers respectful but firm. When Andre approached to refill their drinks, Victoria stopped him with a gesture. May I ask you a personal question? Of course, ma'am. Why do you work here? I mean, she hesitated, trying to phrase the question without sounding condescending. You clearly have skills. Education. Andre smiled, not the professional smile he usually wore, but something more genuine and infinitely sadder. Sometimes life takes us to places we didn't plan to be. That doesn't answer my question. With all due respect, Ms. Ashford, some questions are more complicated than they appear. Timothy reappeared, this time with his patience visibly exhausted. Santos, I need to talk to you. Now. Andre apologized and followed the maitre d' to a more secluded corner of the restaurant, where Timothy clearly believed he was out of earshot of the customers. But Andre had learned, over 2 years of serving Manhattan's elite, that rich people rarely paid enough attention to lower their voices properly. I don't know what game you're playing, Timothy hissed, but I suggest you stop immediately. Knowing sign language doesn't make you special. You're a waiter. Behave like one. I just helped a customer who was feeling ill. You caused a scene. You drew unnecessary attention to yourself. The Ashfords are important customers, and I don't need a lowly employee meddling in delicate family matters. Andre kept his expression neutral, but something in his eyes changed. I understand your concern, Mr. Richardson. Good. Then keep your head down and do your job. And Santos. Timothy leaned closer. Don't fool yourself into thinking that being helpful once changes anything about who you are or where you belong. As Timothy walked away, Andre remained motionless for a few seconds, processing the words. It wasn't the first time he had heard variations of that same message. 2 years at Le Bernardin had been 2 years of constant reminders about his place in the social hierarchy. What Timothy and others like him didn't know was that Andre Santos had occupied very different spaces before finding himself serving wine to people who saw him as furniture. There was a time when his last name appeared in financial newspapers and trade magazines. When young black professionals were called promising and visionary, in the same publications that now wouldn't even notice his existence. When he returned to the hall, Andre found Victoria watching him with an intensity that surprised him. She had spent the last 20 minutes trying to communicate with her father through rudimentary gestures and exaggerated facial expressions, with visibly frustrating results for both of them. Can you, she began, then stopped, clearly struggling with pride. Could you teach me some basics? So I can at least say hi, and how are you without looking like an idiot? Andre looked at her for a long moment. Victoria Ashford, heir to an estimated $8 billion fortune, Stanford graduate, board member of 3 charitable organizations, was asking a waiter for help communicating with her own father. It would be my pleasure, Andre replied, and began showing her the basic signs. For the next 20 minutes, something extraordinary happened in the VIP room at Le Bernardin. Victoria Ashford, one of the most powerful women in Manhattan, sat next to Andre Santos, watching his hands intently as he demonstrated simple gestures. Mr. Ashford watched with a growing smile as his daughter struggled to form her first words in his language. Like this. Victoria tried to sign sorry. Andre gently corrected the positioning of her hands. Almost. Try slower. Other customers began to notice the unusual scene. Whispers spread across the neighboring tables. Timothy watched from afar with an expression that mixed horror and disbelief. His carefully maintained hierarchy was being systematically demolished by an impromptu sign language lesson. It was then that Victoria asked the question that would change everything. "Andre, do you have a college degree?" Andre paused in the middle of a demonstration. "Why?" "Because you teach better than my private tutors at Harvard." And they charged $300 an hour. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Victoria was beginning to realize that there were layers to this man she had never suspected. Andre, for his part, felt the familiar weight of being evaluated, categorized, judged by people who believed that a person could only exist in a single dimension. Each new question Victoria asked only strengthened something within Andre that had been growing silently during his 2 years of forced invisibility, a quiet determination that his true oppressors had not yet recognized, but would soon discover they had completely underestimated the depth of the man they had tried to reduce to a waiter's uniform. Over the next few days, Andre noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere at Le Bernardin. Timothy had clearly spread his version of events to the staff, a narrative in which a waiter had taken advantage of a medical condition to show off in front of important customers. "Careful not to become a star, Santos," commented Kevin, another waiter, with a wicked smile. "I hear you've been giving sign language lessons to millionaires. How about teaching the rest of us to become private tutors too?" Andre continued polishing the glasses, keeping his expression neutral. 2 years of working there had taught him that reacting only fueled the fire. But internally, something was changing. Every sarcastic comment, every condescending look, every attempt to belittle him only strengthened a determination that had been growing silently. "By the way," Kevin continued, clearly stimulated by Andre's apparent passivity, "Timothy is thinking of transferring you to the morning shift. Breakfast. Less prestigious, less tips. More suitable for those who don't know their place." It was then that a familiar voice cut through the conversation. "Sorry to interrupt." Victoria Ashford was standing at the entrance to the service area, something that had never happened in 2 years. Waiters stopped what they were doing. Timothy appeared instantly, with that professional smile he reserved for VIP customers. "Mrs. Ashford. What a surprise. Is there a problem we can solve?" "Actually, yes." Victoria looked directly at Andre. "I need to talk to Andre. In private." The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin seemed to have swallowed his tongue. Timothy opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. Of course, Timothy stammered. "Santos, you, go with the lady." Victoria led Andre to a reserved table in the corner of the restaurant, away from prying eyes. "My father hasn't stopped talking about you since Thursday. He wants to get to know you better." "I'm honored, ma'am." "Victoria. And it seems there's much more to you than a waiter who knows sign language." She paused, studying his face. "I did some research." Andre felt something cold run down his spine. "What kind of research?" "Andre Santos, Columbia University Business Degree, Wharton MBA. Former senior consultant at McKinsey & Company." Victoria listed each title as if revealing cards in a poker game. "Expert in corporate restructuring for Fortune 500 companies." The world around Andre seemed to slow down. 2 years of careful anonymity, of chosen invisibility, had just been shattered in 30 seconds. "Is there something missing from my research, Andre?" He stared at her for a long moment, weighing his options. Victoria Ashford wasn't just a wealthy client. She was the heir to one of the most powerful business empires in the country. If she wanted to destroy him, she could do it with a single phone call. "Why?" Andre asked simply. "Because a man with your qualifications doesn't serve wine by chance. There's a story here, and I want to know it." Andre looked around the restaurant where he had been hiding for 2 years. Timothy watched from afar, clearly trying to decipher what was happening. Kevin and the other waiters whispered among themselves, speculating about the impossible conversation they were witnessing. 3 years ago, I was the youngest consultant promoted to partner at McKinsey. I had clients worth billions, an apartment in Manhattan, a Porsche. Andre paused, the irony not lost on him. I thought I had arrived. What happened? I discovered that my main client, Meridian Industries, was using my restructuring recommendations to lay off thousands of employees while funneling profits into offshore accounts. When I confronted the CEO, he offered me a share of the profits in exchange for my silence. Victoria leaned forward. You refused. I went to the SEC, the FBI, the press. I had evidence, recordings, documents. Andre laughed bitterly. What I didn't have was any sense of the real power I was up against. They destroyed you. Systematically. First, they falsified evidence suggesting I was receiving kickbacks. Then they sued me for breach of client-consultant confidentiality. They froze my assets during the investigation. When I finally proved my innocence 2 years later, I discovered I had been blacklisted. No consulting firm would hire me. Victoria listened in absolute silence, processing every word. I lost everything. My apartment, my car, my savings. More importantly, I lost my reputation. Andre Santos, the promising young man who would be McKinsey's first black managing partner, became Andre Santos, the problematic consultant that no one wanted anywhere near their companies. And you ended up here. I needed to work. I needed to eat. Timothy hired me because I had no references he could verify, so he lied that I had worked in restaurants in college. Andre looked Victoria straight in the eye. For 2 years, I pretended to be invisible. I served people who frequented the same circles that destroyed me, listening to comments about people like me who know their place. Victoria was silent for a long moment. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked. And because, Andre hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. Because something changed on Thursday. Your father treated me like a human being, not like furniture. You treated me with respect. I had long forgotten what that felt like. Andre, do you have any idea who my father is? William Ashford, founder of Ashford Industries, one of the largest investment corporations in the United States. Victoria smiled for the first time since the conversation had begun. And do you know what was the first major scandal my father investigated when he took over the company's compliance division? Andre sensed something change in the air between them. No. Meridian Industries. He spent 2 years investigating their fraudulent restructuring practices. He never managed to prove anything because someone inside the company had tipped them off about the investigation. Victoria leaned closer. But he always suspected that there was an honest consultant somewhere who had tried to blow the whistle on the scheme and had been silenced. Andre's heart began to beat faster. My father has been looking for that consultant for 3 years. He wanted to offer him a position at our company, compensation for damages, and most importantly, a chance to finish what he started. Andre looked at Victoria as if she were speaking in a language he didn't fully understand. Why? Because Ashford Industries doesn't just investigate fraud, we destroy it completely. And because my father believes that people of integrity are the most valuable asset a company can have. Across the restaurant, Timothy watched with growing agitation. Something about that prolonged conversation between one of his most important customers and his troublesome waiter bothered him deeply. Andre, Victoria said softly, what would you say if I offered you the chance not only to rebuild your career, but to finally get justice against the people who tried to destroy you? For the first time in 2 years, Andre felt something he had learned to suppress completely, hope. But more than that, he felt the awakening of a determination that had been dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. As Timothy nervously approached his desk, clearly concerned about the direction the conversation was taking, Andre realized that his long, forced hibernation was coming to an end. The same circles of power that had destroyed him were about to discover that Andre Santos had not only survived, he had used every moment of humiliation to prepare for a comeback that would completely redefine the rules of the game. The real question was no longer whether he would accept Victoria's offer, but whether those who had underestimated him were prepared for the consequences of having awakened a man who now had access to resources that made their former powers insignificant in the face of the storm that was about to brew. 24 hours, Victoria said, glancing at her Cartier watch. That's how long you have to decide whether to accept the position of Director of Compliance and Investigations at Ashford Industries. Starting salary of $400,000, profit sharing, and unlimited resources to investigate and prosecute corporate fraud. Andre looked around Lou Bernardine one last time as an employee. Timothy watched from a distance, clearly agitated by the prolonged conversation. Kevin and the other waiters whispered increasingly fantastical theories about what was happening. There's just one condition, Victoria continued with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father insists that your first case be a complete investigation of this company's labor practices. Andre's blood ran cold. Victoria. 3 anonymous complaints came into our legal department last week. Racial discrimination, sexual harassment, violation of federal labor laws. She opened a discreet folder. Coincidentally, they all specifically mention the behavior of a certain maitre d' named Timothy Richardson. Across the room, Timothy finally lost his patience and approached the table. I apologize for the interruption, Ms. Ashford, but Santos has responsibilities to fulfill. Victoria looked at Timothy with the icy expression she reserved for people she considered insignificant. Actually, Mr. Richardson, Andre no longer has any responsibilities here. He has just accepted an executive position at my company. Timothy's face flushed several shades of red. Executive position? This man is a waiter. This man, Andre said, rising slowly, is Andre Santos, former senior consultant at McKinsey & Company, MBA from Wharton, specialist in corporate restructuring and fraud detection. The silence that followed was absolute. Kevin, who was serving wine at the next table, almost dropped the bottle. The other employees completely stopped what they were doing. For 2 years, Andre continued, his voice gaining the natural authority he had been forced to suppress, I systematically observed this company's labor violations. I documented every discriminatory comment, every illegal practice, every abuse of power. Timothy stammered, That's impossible. You were hired without references. Because I was being systematically prevented from working in my field by a smear campaign orchestrated by corrupt companies, Andre explained calmly. But I had plenty of time to observe and learn. Victoria opened her laptop. Andre, would you like to review some of the evidence we've collected? The screen showed photographs, documents, audio recordings. Timothy turned pale when he recognized his own voice making comments about people like Andre knowing their place. Kevin appeared in a video making racist imitations when he thought no one was watching. Where did you get this? Timothy whispered. Internal security system, Victoria replied casually. Ashford Industries acquired a majority stake in this establishment last week. Part of our due diligence process includes a complete review of all security recordings from the last 24 months. Andre felt a deep satisfaction watching Timothy process the information. You bought us. Actually, the acquisition was Andre's suggestion, Victoria lied smoothly. After he mentioned the irregularities he observed while working here, my father decided it would be interesting to investigate further. The truth was simpler and more devastating. Victoria had bought the restaurant in a 15-minute phone call that morning, specifically to give Andre the pleasure of confronting his former oppressors with real power in his hands. Mr. Richardson, Andre said, removing his waiter's apron and placing it carefully on the table, as the new director of compliance for the company that owns this establishment, I have a few questions about your management practices. Timothy looked desperately around the room, as if searching for an exit that did not exist. The other employees crowded around, some shocked, others clearly terrified of what this meant for their own jobs. First question, Andre continued, pulling out his phone. Can you explain this email you sent to corporate management 6 months ago, recommending that waiters of certain backgrounds be kept away from VIP customers? Timothy opened and closed his mouth like a fish. I never. Andre showed the screen. It's here. With your digital signature. Sent from your corporate email. Second question, Victoria interrupted, clearly amused. How do you explain the fact that black employees at this establishment receive, on average, 40% less in tips than white employees, despite being consistently assigned to the least profitable sections? That's systematic discrimination, Andre finished. Documented in spreadsheets that you yourself maintain to optimize staff distribution. Kevin tried to slip away discreetly, but Victoria stopped him with a gesture. Mr. Morrison, don't leave. I have some interesting audio recordings I'd like to discuss with you. What followed was 15 minutes of methodical and complete humiliation. Every racist comment, every discriminatory joke, every abuse of power from the past 2 years was presented with irrefutable evidence. Timothy and Kevin alternated between desperate denial and pathetic attempts to justify their actions. You've got it all wrong, Timothy finally pleaded. It was never about race. Andre just didn't fit the client profile. Andre laughed, not the forced deferential laugh he had feigned for 2 years, but a genuine laugh, rich with irony. Clientele profile. Interesting choice of words for a man who is now answering to the very man you believed didn't fit in. Please, Timothy whispered. I have a family. A mortgage. And I had a career, a reputation, a life, Andre replied calmly. But I've learned something important over the past 2 years. The real difference between us is not skin color or social background. It's character. Victoria closed her laptop. Mr. Richardson, your resignation is effective immediately. Human Resources will contact you about the transition process and pending legal issues. As Timothy left the room with his shoulders slumped, defeated, Andre looked at the other employees. Some seemed genuinely shocked by the revelations. Others had clearly been silent accomplices. For the remaining employees, Andre announced, his voice echoing through the now silent room, there will be significant changes in personnel policies. Starting with mandatory training on diversity and inclusion. Maria, one of the few employees who had always treated Andre with respect, approached timidly. Mr. Santos, does this mean you will be running the restaurant now? Andre looked at Victoria, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Among other responsibilities, yes. But my main focus will be to ensure that this establishment becomes an example of how to treat employees with dignity and respect. As the news spread throughout the restaurant, Andre observed the varied reactions. Some employees seemed relieved, people like Maria, who had witnessed the discrimination but felt powerless to report it. Others, complicit in the previous system, were clearly calculating their chances of survival under the new regime. There's one last thing, Victoria said, pulling out a final folder. Andre, how do you feel about testifying in federal workplace discrimination cases? Why? Because your former employer, Meridian Industries, has just been indicted by the FBI. Apparently, your original investigation provided crucial clues that allowed them to build a solid case. She smiled. My father thought you'd like to know that your courage 3 years ago is finally paying off. Andre felt something complete inside his chest. The circle was closing. The people who had tried to destroy him for doing the right thing were finally facing the consequences. And he was no longer alone in the fight. As the last employees processed the new reality and Victoria organized her documents, Andre looked around the hall where he had spent 2 years feeling invisible. Power had changed hands so quickly that it still seemed surreal. But the real transformation was not just in the change of ownership or Timothy's downfall. It was in the growing realization that Andre Santos, the man they had underestimated, belittled, and tried to break, had not only survived but emerged with resources that completely transformed the rules of the game they thought they were playing. 6 months later, Andre sat in his office on the 47th floor of Ashford Tower, reviewing quarterly reports that showed impressive numbers. His compliance division had identified corporate fraud totaling $2.3 billion, resulting in 47 successful federal lawsuits. Lou Bernardine, now renamed Santos & Company, had become the first fine dining restaurant in Manhattan certified as an exemplary workplace by the Department of Labor. Maria, promoted to general manager, coordinated a diverse team where tips were distributed equally and respect was mandatory policy. Timothy Richardson had been sentenced to 2 years in prison for systematic workplace discrimination. Kevin now worked at a fast food restaurant in Queens, after no reputable restaurant would hire him once the scandal went viral on social media. Dad always said that you recognize a person's true character not by what they do when they have power, but by what they do when they believe they have none, Victoria commented during the celebratory lunch. Andre smiled, looking out the window at the city where he had been invisible for so long. The best revenge is not to destroy those who have hurt you. It's building something bigger than they could ever imagine. Mr. Ashford, now his mentor and father figure, nodded proudly. You taught us that true leadership doesn't come from titles or money, but from integrity. Andre had learned that sometimes we need to cross deep valleys to discover mountains we didn't even know existed within us. Each humiliation had been an investment in his own strength. And you, have you discovered that your apparent defeats may just be preparation for unimaginable victories? Subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that those who underestimate people of integrity always pay the price for their own arrogance.